This is Molly Hemingway of The Federalist inviting you to join me for the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case Conference, Friday, June 12th and Saturday, June 13th at Concordia University, Chicago. I'll be speaking and signing copies of my new book, Alito, the Justice Who Reshaped the Supreme Court and Restored the U.S. Constitution. Learn more at issuesetc.org. issuesetc.org.
The emperor has no clothes on. He's buck naked. That child had to speak the truth no matter how it would make the king feel. And we have to do that today. We have to be very conscientious objectors to the madness that is gender ideology.
And most people default into this idea of feminism is this idea that men are contemptible, which is, of course, the idea behind smashing the patriarchy, and women need to be just like them and have the same equality.
The Crusades were a very belated response to many centuries of Muslim conquests, in which 2/3 of the old Christian world had already fallen to Muslim conquest.
And our faith is strong, not because of the fervor of its affection, but because of the object to which it clings, Christ. And there is no stronger faith than a really timid grasping to the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Families sailing on their family vacation on lakes in Minnesota love Issues Etc.
We love Issues Etc. Woo!
So far, we have learned a lot about the Crusades that you wouldn't find in your average history book. Your average history book, a high school history book, if it even includes the Crusades, is going to say something about colonialism and Christian aggression and things like that, ignoring pretty much all of the context of these warlike periods. Well, the Third Crusade, we found out, was an abject failure. It left Jerusalem in the hands of Muslims, got a few concessions. I wonder what the next crusade will bring. Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc., live on this Friday afternoon, June the 5th. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in. We'll be in part 3 of our series on the Crusades with Dr. Thomas Madden, author of The Concise History of the Crusades. Dr. Ken Scherb joins us for part 3 of our series on 19th century Lutheran theologian and missionary Friedrich Wyneken. And then we'll round things off today with Pastor Chris Roseborough, Fighting for the Faith. This week in Pop Christianity, we'll hear a little bit from Jennifer LeClaire about the Python spirit. Throughout the week, we've been playing excerpts from interviews on the Crusades with Dr. Thomas Madden, professor of history at St. Louis University and author of the books A Concise History of the Crusades and The Fall of Republics. We've discussed the first 3 Crusades, a success, and then a failure. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday with Dr. Madden's answer to the question, to what degree did the failure of the Third Crusade to completely take Jerusalem, because Jerusalem, while it was open to pilgrims, remained in Muslim hands, to what degree did that make the Fourth Crusade inevitable?
Yeah, there was always going to be another crusade to try to take Jerusalem, because, as I said, everything in the 12th century and the 13th century was all about reform of the church, reform of Christian society, and the crusade was seen as one element in that reform. And so it was always going to be another crusade to try to take back Jerusalem, as long as that mindset remained. The Fourth Crusade really was rescued by some kinsmen of Richard. It was at a knightly tournament when Thibaut of Champagne and some of his other kinsmen, these were powerful nobles, decided to take the cross and devote themselves to picking up what Richard was not able to do. So the ghost of Richard was very much behind all of this. And what they wanted to do was bring together a very large crusade force. Now, this was not going to be a king running it. This would be major nobles like Thibaut and Hugh of St. Pol and other major French nobility. And the idea would be to go and do the crusade that Richard wanted to do. And so beginning in 1200 and 1201, the crusade starts to pick up recruits. The Pope is very happy about this, and he's doing everything he can to support it. The idea also was that, like Richard, they didn't want to walk to the Holy Land. They wanted to have a fleet. Unfortunately, these French nobles did not have fleets. They're knights. They don't have giant fleets. So they would have to get someone to give them one. And so the plan was that the Pope had given them this idea. The plan was to go to Venice. Now, Venice has nothing but fleets. They're a maritime power. And the Venetians had, in essence, promised the Pope that they would join this crusade if it ever got off the ground. And now it was clearly getting off the ground. And so the idea was to have a large land-based army that would be French. That army would then come to Venice, and Venice would produce the fleet, both the war fleet for fighting naval battles and also the transport fleet to carry the soldiers and the horses and everyone else to bring them to the Holy Land. And so that was the basic idea behind it. The execution, however, was a mess. There was no one leader, as you had with Richard, with deep pockets who could pay all the bills. Instead, they were trying to do what Richard had done, but without that kind of infrastructure. So when they went to Venice, when the envoys were sent to Venice to make a contract for this, the Venetians are businessmen, so they're making contracts. And they told the Venetians how many men, how many horses, because the Venetians would have to build the fleet. And so they told them that they needed a fleet for 33,500 men and about 9,000 horse. And they would also need all the provisions for that very large army for 1 year. So we're talking an enormous amount of money. So the contract is drafted. The idea was that once the Crusaders all arrived the next year, that they would all individually pay their passage. But when that next year came, a lot of the Crusaders, as they were making their way south, decided to go to other ports. And so in Venice, only about 11,000 men actually showed up. So they had a fleet that was 3 times too big. And they had to pay for it. And they simply did not have the money to do that. So they paid all of the money that they had, but that was only about half of what they owed for the fleet. And as a result, the fleet sat there for most of the summer, waiting for more men and waiting for more money. It became quite depressing. The Crusaders were very upset, and they were, many of them would have just gone home, but the incredible humiliation of having put all this together and been gone so long, and then to just go home and say, well, we never left Europe. It was really too much. So eventually they worked out a deal where the Crusaders would help the Venetians capture a city, the city of Zara, which is what's called Zadar today. It's in Croatia. This was a city that had been under Venetian control for a long time, but had rebelled recently, and the Venetians had not been able to take it. So the Venetian argument was that if you help us to recapture this city, then we'll suspend your debt. And if you ever get any booty or anything, you can pay us then, but we'll suspend the debt for now, and we can get the crusade going. As you might imagine, this was very controversial. Zadar was not a Muslim city, it was a Catholic city. And not only that, but it was under the protection of the church because the current ruler was the King of Hungary, Emmerich, who had taken the cross. He hadn't gone on crusade, but his lands were legally protected by the church. And so you essentially had a situation in which the crusade was attacking a city that was under papal protection, And the Pope made it clear that if they attacked the city, they would be automatically excommunicated, which ultimately they did. And so they took the city, they spent the winter there, and then they immediately sent envoys to Rome to beg forgiveness for having taken the city because they didn't have much other choice. So right from the beginning, it was a pretty big mess. They spent the winter in Zara, and by that time, most of their provisions had been eaten, and they weren't even out of the Adriatic yet. And it was at that point, because they were in such bad straits, that they got mired in Byzantine politics. There was a pretender to the throne of Constantinople named Alexius Angelus. He was about 13 or 14. He essentially made an offer to them that if they would bring him to Constantinople and place him on the throne there, that he would pay all their debts, he would pay seas of money to them, that he would join the crusade with them to help to restore Jerusalem, and that he would end the schism between Constantinople and Rome, that he would order the Patriarch of Constantinople to give his obedience to the Pope in Rome. And so it was a pretty big package that he was offering. But of course, he was offering it because he had nothing. All he had was just promises. So again, very controversial. Many of the Crusaders began peeling off. They thought that the whole enterprise had gone astray. But those that stuck with it sailed to Constantinople. Ultimately, they were successful in putting this young man on the throne there. He paid them about half of what he owed, and then essentially told them to go away, which upset them. And as a result, in 1204, the Fourth Crusade attacked the greatest Christian city in the world, Constantinople, and captured it and sacked it. It was by far the most profitable sack in all of Crusade history because Constantinople was rich, very rich. And so the amount of wealth that they found there when they sacked the city was enormous. Also, relics, many, many relics were taken because these relics, these holy relics, were kept in Constantinople because it was a safe place. And so many of these relics were sent to Europe. In fact, including some of the most high-profile relics that still exist today, like the Crown of Thorns and Notre Dame came from Constantinople. I believe that the Shroud of Turin almost certainly came from Constantinople. So these relics all started making their way to Europe as a result of this. And the Crusaders, they essentially just created a new empire in Constantinople. Historians refer to this as the Latin Empire of Constantinople, but they elected one of their own. Baldwin of Flanders became now Baldwin I, the Emperor of Constantinople. And so Constantinople would be connected with Western Europe and ruled by Western Europeans between 1204 and 1261, when the Byzantines finally took the city back. But the damage to the city of Constantinople was enormous. Just to give you an idea, the population of Constantinople when the crusade arrived in 1203 was probably about 1 million people in the metropolitan area. Within the walls, maybe about 600,000. By 1261, when the Byzantines took the city back, it was like a ghost town. There was maybe 15,000 people living in the walls. So it dramatically harmed Constantinople, and it would never recover, not really until the Ottoman Empire conquered the city in 1453.
Dr. Thomas Madden is our guest, author of The Concise History of the Crusades. We are talking about the Fourth Crusade. We'll get a little assessment of it next.
There's a tremendous amount of confusion about Islam in the United States, particularly among Christians who often tend to think that they need to unite with people of faith of all traditions against secularism.
Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch talking about his presentation at the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
And while there's some truth to that, at the same time, Christians should know what Muslims think of them and what Islam teaches about Christianity. I'll be illuminating all that. It's quite shocking, as well as discussing the political aspects of Islam that every American needs to know about.
You can meet and hear Robert Spencer making the case against Islam at this year's Making the Case conference, Friday, June 12th and Saturday, June 13th at Concordia University, Chicago. Find out more and register at issuesetc.org or by calling 618-223-8385. Making the Case, June 12th and 13th in River Forest, Illinois.
Others talk. We have something to say. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Lutherans for Life applies God's Word, both His law and His gospel, to all the life issues: abortion, sexual purity, assisted suicide and euthanasia, and biotechnology. If you have any questions about LFL resources, or if you want to find out more about forming a life team or life chapter, or becoming a life advocate, contact Lutherans for Life at 888-364-LIFE or at info@lutheransforlife.org.
Memoria Press Homeschool Curriculum equips you with everything you need to give your child a classical Christian education. They want to help you cultivate in your student a love for what is good, true, and beautiful. Their curriculum is easy to use and covers kindergarten to 12th grade. Learn more at memoriapress.com. Save $5 when you enter the coupon code LPR26MP. Memoria Press, saving Western civilization one student at a time.
Father's Day is quickly approaching. Here's a gift idea. Register your dad or husband for next week's Issues, Etc. Making the Case conference. The premier conference for Christian laity is Friday, June 12th and Saturday, June 13th at Concordia University, Chicago. Registration is $160 and includes 3 meals. On-campus dorm rooms are available. Register online at issuesetc.org or by giving us a call, 618-223-8385. Making the Case, June 12th and 13th in River Forest, Illinois. It's part 3 of our series on the Crusades with Dr. Thomas Madden, author of The Concise History of the Crusades. So to sum this up, this Fourth Crusade failed to reach its goal. It was, on 2 occasions, distracted into other matters. And while it may have been a financial success for the Crusaders ultimately, and then maybe even for Europe, it basically went completely off its mission.
Yes, definitely. Now, the original plan of the Fourth Crusade was actually to take up Richard's idea of attacking Egypt. Now, they knew that Crusaders wouldn't sign up for that because that's not why someone would go to such danger and expense, would be to go and capture Egypt. But it was the plan. The original treaty that was signed in Venice had a secret codicil in it that said, we're going to Egypt. The original plan was, had they been able to pay all their bills, was that the crusade would launch, it would then sail to Egypt, and then the Crusaders would all get off the ships there, and there wouldn't be much they could do about it. Here we are, there's the Muslims, let's fight. So most of the Crusaders would not have discovered they were fighting in Egypt until they actually arrived there. As it happens, that never occurred. They only attacked Constantinople. And in fact, the Fourth Crusade would never raise a sword against a Muslim. It would only kill Christians, both at Zara and in Constantinople. The Pope was very upset. Pope Innocent III had written many letters to the Crusaders. He had forbade them repeatedly to attack Christians. He forbade them to attack Constantinople. But once it had happened, and once Constantinople had fallen, he accepted it, as everyone else did at the time, that this was clearly God's will. Constantinople was thought to be absolutely impregnable, and it had shrugged off armies that were 10 times larger than the Fourth Crusade without much difficulty. And the set of circumstances that occurred in which the Crusade was able to take Constantinople were bizarre. So once it had all happened, people were so shocked by it that they just assumed that God must want us to have Constantinople. And the Pope, in fact, said that, he had been trying to bring the Byzantines back under the control of Rome for quite a long time. He had been trying to mend the schism, and now it was done, or at least that's what he thought. Even the Byzantines saw this as the act of God. Many of them believed that Constantinople had simply become too haughty, too full of sin, and that God had decided to give it over to the barbarians. That's how they saw Western Europeans, to give the city over to the barbarians to punish them for their sins. So it was the one thing that they all agreed on, was that this couldn't have happened without God supporting it. And so it was, although from a modern perspective, we tend to look at the Fourth Crusade as this very bizarre, tragic event. But from the medieval perspective, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as being very successful. And many in the West saw this as a punishment for the Byzantines, the Greeks, because they had not supported the crusade and had actively impeded crusades. And that now, with Constantinople under the control of the West, now Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire could now help the crusade effort rather than to harm it. In fact, however, that never occurred. The Latin Empire of Constantinople during its 50-some years was always teetering on near destruction. It was always out of money. It was surrounded by enemies. And it not only could they not help out with crusading, but they actually needed crusades to help them to hold on to the city. And so rather than helping the crusade effort, it actually sapped energy from the European crusade effort to instead try to prop up Constantinople.
Why do we need to understand Reconquista, kind of crusading in Europe itself?
Yeah, Reconquista is the multi-century effort and project in the Iberian Peninsula to recapture the territories that had been conquered by Muslims. When the initial Arab attacks occurred, by 711, the Muslims had conquered much of the Iberian Peninsula. And so the Christian powers in the north had, for many centuries, been waging on again, off again wars against Muslims to try to recapture Spain. The Reconquista predates the Crusade. It had been going on for several centuries before the First Crusade. It was understood as being a sanctified war, but Christianity had no real concept of holy war in that regard. And so when the First Crusade got started, Pope Urban II specifically told the Spanish that they were not to join this effort because their war was at home. Their war was trying to retake those Christian territories and to push the Muslims out of Spain. And so that's what they did. But it meant that the Reconquista became rebranded now as a crusade in its own right. And so that was their focus in the Iberian Peninsula. Their focus was on that Reconquista. But there were other domestic crusades because the concept, once the crusading had got started, the concept of crusading became associated not just with pilgrimage, but also with defending Christianity and defending the church and defending the lands, Christian lands. And if that becomes the defining feature of the crusade, then it doesn't have to be just in the Holy Land. In fact, in many cases, you could have threats in Europe itself that were even more pressing to either Christianity or to the church than would be those threats far away in the Holy Land. So, for example, in the Second Crusade, we talked last time about the crusade that went to the east, but there were other elements of the Second Crusade that never went to the east. There was the reconquest of Lisbon, for example. A lot of English crusaders went to Lisbon and conquered the city from the Muslims. So that was one aspect of it. There was also the Wendish Crusade, which was in the Baltics, in Northern Europe. This was an area where there were pagans, pagan Wends, who had been attacking Christians and killing Christian missionaries and others. And so there were a lot of Northern German crusaders who, rather than go to the Holy Land, waged war in the north, in the Baltics, against the Wends. So this idea of domestic crusading would continue on. And there are even some crusades, even during the pontificate of Innocent III, where if the Pope was being threatened by a secular lord, they could call a crusade to come to their defense, because the idea was you were coming to defend the church, defending the Pope. So you do have what historians sometimes refer to as political crusades, which are these crusades that are happening in defense of the papacy or the papal lands in Italy. So it becomes a whole variety of various crusading, particularly by the 13th century. So just because you're on a crusade doesn't necessarily mean you're going to the Holy Land. There's lots of other theaters of operation for crusading by that time.
Dr. Thomas Madden is professor of history at St. Louis University, author of the book, The Concise History of the Crusades, and a forthcoming publication, The Fall of Republics. When we come back, Dr. Ken Scherb joins us. We're going to spend some time talking more about the mid-career of Lutheran theologian Friedrich Wyneken.
The church's music from the 2nd century.
Shepherd of tender youth, guiding in love and truth.
The 6th century. The 12th century. The 16th century. The 21st century. The best of the church's music from the past 2,000 years. LutheranPublicRadio.org.
Defending the faith, teaching the truth. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Are you looking for a confirmation gift for the confirmand in your life? Ad Crucem has a huge selection of lovely gifts to suit any budget. See our jewelry or browse our prayer aids with stunning icons, plaques, crucifixes, and certificates. Our personalized ornaments and boxes are other great ideas. And of course, our theologically sound greeting cards complement the gift perfectly. Visit adcrucem.com. That's ADCRUCEM.com.
Birds sing, cows moo, thunderstorms wake you from a deep sleep, but for many, they can't hear it. They're deaf, living in a world of total silence. The Epitha Lutheran Mission Society for Deaf Ministry is the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted exclusively to the deaf and hard of hearing. Their mission is to bring the gospel message of Jesus' love and saving grace to those who are deaf. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.